Hi guys, it's me again. This is going to be a two-part blog about how doctors treat patients that are undiagnosed or who have a um, invisible chronic illness, meaning their symptoms aren't like readily seen. And even sometimes people who do have symptoms readily seen, like people with AIDS or MS or any of those that are, the person can look kind of healthy at first. Anyways, I've had some horrible experiences myself, uh, but I'm going to start out with actually talking about a movie, Flight Plan, with Jodie Foster, and you're going to be really confused as to why I'm doing this, but bear with me, okay? So Flight Plan was this movie based on a foreign film where a engineer's husband just died and they're flying the body back to get it buried, and she takes her daughter on an airplane and falls asleep, and when she wakes up her daughter's missing, and she's panicked at first, but her daughter wanders off, and so she kind of is getting the flight attendants to help her out look for her daughter, and then they're not finding her, so she's asking, well, did you look here? Did you look there? There's two bathrooms on this airplane, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, how do you know so much about this airplane? Like looking at her all suspiciously. And she's like, well, I was an engineer. And they're like, yeah, you were, kind of thing. And then they start to go, one of them comes up and says, your daughter was never on the roster or the head count. So to us, she never existed. Are you sure that she was with you? And she's all, yeah, I was. And then she starts to doubt herself. Well, maybe she wasn't with me. Maybe the stress of my husband dying made me, make her up or make up this whole thing. And so she sits down and she's just like, dealing with this self-doubt, and looks over, and a heart that her daughter had drawn on the airplane window is there, and then she sees her daughter's teddy bear, and so she runs up to the flight attendant with the teddy bear, and the flight attendant goes, a teddy bear doesn't mean somebody exists, basically. So the whole movie basically degenerates into this action-packed thriller where her daughter was kidnapped, and the plane's being hijacked, and there's a bomb, and they land, and the FBI's there, and the whole plane gets evacuated, and she finds her daughter, and and stops the bomb. And as she's walking off the plane with her daughter in her arms, it's this truly triumphant moment for her to show people that her daughter did indeed exist. She wasn't being hysterical, and that she, sorry, I lose train of my thought all the time. It's part of being sick. And that, her daughter did just basically indeed exist, and she's not crazy. So I always like this as an example as to what happened when I was sick and trying to get the doctors to diagnose me with something. It was this search, and I would be Jodie Foster's character, and my daughter would be my sickness. The flight attendants would be the doctors, and the airplane would be my body, and just trying to search for an answer, and being treated like I was crazy at some points, and finding little clues and trying to use those as, well, what about this? What about that? Well, it doesn't really matter. And then even the engineer comment, I would try to get them like, well, look at this, don't you think this would be a good possibility? Well, how do you know about that? Are you researching too much? So yeah, that's like the best description of the search for a diagnosis. And it's really sad because our society is set up on diagnosis. They don't understand that sometimes you can not have an answer for years and years and years, or never get an answer. I had one doctor when I very first got sick. And he was a precursor of what was to come, and I had gotten like kind of off kilter, weird feeling, foggy headed. I didn't know at the time that was what it was called, on a train in Portland, where I lived at the time. And my mom was really worried because I'd been feeling kind of off for a long time. So we got right off the train and into an urgent care. And this urgent care doctor, after telling him what was wrong with me, he said about 90% of the dizziness cases he sees clears up in a year. And of the 10% of dizziness cases that don't, only 90% of them, or 10% of them, get diagnosed. And at the time, I found that very like off-putting, negative, like kind of offensive in a way, like go home and wait a year. What, but it was his attitude and what he said and all of that. Like, I didn't know at the time that it was him trying to warn me of what's to come. I do have to say, through all of this, one of the most sad things for me is that I have lost faith in the medical community completely. Even the good doctors, because they start out good and then they end up, doing things and treating me in ways that I would never treat another person. And they give you diagnoses of psychological nature when they can't figure it out. I just, in their Hippocratic oath, it says that, if you don't know what's wrong, you seek help and you admit you don't know what it is, and no doctor will do that. So I guess I had this really romantic view before, and it was perpetuated by TV of, the doctor as a medical investigator, that when you present them with this case of like weird symptoms, they go, yay, okay, well, let me get the medical text out. Let me talk to people, let's figure this out, and I get these pictures of like JD and Elliot and Turk sitting up late with all these books around them, trying to find out why a patient's orange, or Hal's limping into the room to give this dramatic diagnosis of some rare genetic disorder, but that's really not the case. These doctors are, I'm like a threat to them when I would come in. I'm like proof that they don't know everything. The fact that I'm not okay with certain things, like them saying, it's just a migraine, and I go, no, it's not just a migraine. Like, listen to me. These symptoms aren't normal. I need you to look further. And and they're like, wait, you're not accepting what I'm saying? Well, this isn't going to work. You've obviously got problems of the mind. So, yeah, I've completely just disappointed. And I feel like when you need doctors the most, when you're sick and you are tired and you need to be taken care of, that's when they failed me. So just no faith. And the unfortunate thing is our society is so focused on labels and not symptoms. So if you tell somebody you're tired all the time and I pass out sometimes and blah, 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 they say, well, what is it? What's going on? And you say, well, I don't know. I've been undiagnosed. They kind of write you off. Now, if I said I have like lupus or exertion intolerance, systemic exertion intolerance disease, or anything like that, they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, And the government, when you apply for disability, if you just list symptoms, they're not going to give you anything. Doctors as well, when you come in with a actual disease, they're like, okay, this is how I'm going to treat you. If you come in with symptoms, they'll just brush those symptoms off. So that's why I was fighting so hard for a diagnosis. Me personally, I could care less if I had a diagnosis or not. I had the symptoms. I was dealing with the symptoms. If they couldn't give me a diagnosis, I would have been fine with that. It was the treatment I was receiving having been undiagnosed. So that's just a little background into my personal why I'm going to be talking about the next segment. The next segment is going to be the actual diagnoses that they like to give you that are psychological. That way, if you go into a doctor and they nicely try to tell you you have this, you know exactly what they're saying, and I'll give you one term that'll help you fight back with it. So stick around and wait for the next episode of Speaking Through the Fog.